The SAT and ACT are a source of stress for students and parents, and this presentation is basically meant to de-stress you. So we answer all of the common questions that students and parents have, and if there's a question that's not listed that you want to ask, feel free to ask in the comment section and I'll do my best to answer it. I'm going to do a short answer, long answer format for all of these questions. I'll give you a short answer so that hopefully you can remember it, and then I'll dive a bit more deeply into that question. The first question is, which test is better for your child? The short answer is that you want to take a full-length practice test on both tests to see which is better. Now, I know that sitting down for 3 hours to take one of these tests is pretty annoying, particularly to have to do it twice, but those 6 to 7 hours you spend initially taking a full-length test on each one will be invaluable because it could potentially save you 50 hours of preparation down the line if you just spend those 6 to 7 hours to take a full-length practice test on each one. The long answer, of course, is that it depends, but let's quickly compare the tests. Both tests have 5 sections if you include the optional essay. For the SAT, we have reading, writing, and language, 2 math sections, a non-calculator part and a calculator part, and the essay. It's scored out of 1,600, and you get up to 800 on math and up to 800 on reading and writing, which is a combined score. The essay is up to 24 and is a separate score that does not affect the score out of 1,600. For the ACT, we have English, which is like the writing and language on the SAT and that they test grammar. Math, for which you have a calculator for the whole section. Reading, which is similar to SAT reading. Science, and the essay. You get a score out of 36 on the English, math, reading, and science sections, and those are averaged to get your composite score, which does round up if your score ends with 0.5. The essay is out of 12, and it's a separate score that does not affect your composite score out of 36. Now, 2 quick things I'd like to note before I move on. First, the science is often really scary to students, but in reality, the science section is not really science. Think of it more like reading comprehension with tables and graphs. Second, while the essay is technically optional on both the SAT and ACT, many colleges do require it, and so I would highly recommend doing the essay in order to make sure you keep your college options open. With those couple of things out of the way, let's compare the tests. Something you might have noticed is that the ACT has more questions and you have less time overall. This is actually the essential difference between the SAT and ACT. The SAT is a bit harder on a per question basis, but you have more time to think about your answers. The ACT questions are easier, but you have to move faster. The next question is, do colleges prefer one test over the other? The short answer is no. The long answer is also no. But really, they don't care. 100% of colleges accept both tests. There are some schools that don't require the SAT or ACT at all, but to the best of my knowledge, if a college accepts one test, they accept the other. That said, it's true that some colleges do receive a higher proportion of one test versus another. Generally, colleges in the Midwest will tend to see most applicants applying with the ACT, whereas schools on the coasts tend to get more SAT. But even if 90% of applicants to a particular college are submitting the ACT and you submit the SAT, that's okay. There's a concordance table that can roughly translate the scores, so it's possible to compare college applicants. The next question is, how many times can your child take the test? The short answer is, for the SAT, 2 to 3 times, and for the ACT, you can take it as many times as you want, and I'll go into why shortly. For the long answer, let's first talk about score choice. A common worry among students and parents is that colleges will be able to see your SAT and ACT scores. They will not. You explicitly authorize which scores are sent to colleges. They don't automatically see them. That said, some colleges do ask you to send all of your scores. Let's step back for a second and discuss the 3 main score policies for college admissions. There's super scoring, single sitting, and all scores. Colleges that super score combine your best sections across multiple tests. Colleges with a single sitting policy will consider your highest single test, and colleges with an all scores policy want to see all of your scores and consider them as a package. So for those schools that have the all scores policy, you're supposed to send everything. Now, are some people going to be dishonest and not send all the SAT scores for a college that asks for them? Yes, of course, but I can't recommend that. I would just advise to be honest with this. Now, because some colleges have an all scores policy, I would highly recommend that you not go take the real SAT as a baseline. This is something that I see parents have their children do very frequently. Basically, they say, why don't you go try the SAT and see where you're at? But this is actually a horrible idea, because for the schools that have the all scores policy, they're going to see that bad score on your record, and that does not look good. So for those schools that have the all scores policy, I would say if you want to keep those schools in your college list, I would advise taking the SAT a maximum of 3 times. Up to 3 is perfectly normal and I wouldn't stress about it. But if you're thinking about a 4th time, I would only do that if you're sure you're going to improve on that 4th attempt. If you take it a 4th time and you don't improve at all, that does look kind of bad. So you want to think hard about whether you're going to take it a 4th time. This segues into the next question, which is, can the scores be canceled or deleted? The short answer is that you can cancel your SAT or ACT score up until the Thursday after your test, but only the ACT allows for deletion of scores. For the long answer, here are the exact deadlines for the SAT and ACT. But really the important thing is this: score deletion is possible on the ACT, but not the SAT. If there's one thing in this presentation to remember, it's this. For the ACT, it's possible to see your score, then decide to delete it. For the SAT, once you get the score, it's impossible to remove it from your record. Now, of course, this means that it's possible to game the system for the ACT. You could take the ACT 10 times to get the score you want, then delete 9 of them. But most people are not going to go to that level of effort. Either way, this is a huge difference between the SAT and ACT that should be considered. I often tell students that if you tend to get very anxious for big tests, the ACT may be a better test for you simply because you can take it as many times as you want without consequence. The next question is, when should your child take the test? The short answer is when he or she is ready to get the goal score, which should be fairly obvious, but I realize it's not especially helpful. The long answer will hopefully be more instructive. I recommend taking it at the beginning of junior year, either in the summer going into 11th grade or the fall of 11th grade. I do not recommend taking it in the spring of junior year for the first time if you can help it. The reason that it's better to take it early in the junior year rather than toward the end of junior year is pretty simple, which is just that junior year can be stressful. Junior year grades are extremely important for college admissions, and there are AP exams and SAT subject tests to study for in the spring. Trying to tackle the SAT or ACT during that time period in addition can be quite stressful. That said, it's better to take the test in the spring of junior year than to wait until senior year. I would highly recommend not waiting until senior year to take the SAT or ACT for the first time. At that point, you're applying to colleges and it could be even more stressful. It's perfectly fine to take the test for a second or third time in senior year, but taking it for the first time is pretty stressful. It's nice to at least have some score on the SAT or ACT by the end of junior year. Now, is it possible to take it earlier than junior year? Yes. If you're very advanced, it's possible to take it at the end of sophomore year. However, I would only recommend doing this if you're able to get a 1500 plus on the SAT or 34 plus on the ACT, basically the top echelon of scores. Also, it's possible to take the SAT or ACT as a middle schooler. Typically, students do this if they're trying to qualify for a summer program such as CTY, which is actually a program I went to myself and thought was quite fun. If you do take the test as a middle schooler, there's no need to worry because your scores are deleted automatically once you enter high school, unless you specifically ask for them to be kept. And then lastly on this question, let's take a look at when the SAT and ACT are offered. They're each offered 7 times per year, and we can see that on this chart. A few quick notes. First, the SAT and ACT never overlap, so it's always possible to take both tests in a given month. Second, it's possible to take the SAT subject test on any date in which the SAT is offered, except for March. You can't do the subject tests in March, you can only do the general SAT. Also, you can't do the general SAT and the subject tests at the same time, so you can only do one or the other, not both. And then the third thing is that you need to register 5 to 6 weeks in advance of the date to avoid a late fee. It's also a good idea to register early because otherwise you might be stuck going to a test center that's pretty far away. I can assure you that it won't be fun if you have to drive for 40 minutes to get to the test center for your test at 7:30 in the morning. That's not going to be a fun day for you. The next question is, when should your child start studying? The short answer is during the summer between 10th and 11th grade, and earlier if it's possible. The long answer will discuss a couple of things. First, I ideally like to have students prep in the summers so that prep doesn't interfere with grades. Grades are ultimately more important for college admissions than your SAT or ACT scores, so you don't want to potentially hurt your grades by prepping for the SAT or ACT during a school year. So that's kind of the ideal, is to do it during the summer. Now, for students with higher scores, the advice I gave in the short answer pretty much applies. Your child can start prep during the summer prior to 11th grade, and then take the real test in the fall of 11th grade or possibly at the end of that summer. For students with lower scores, however, I recommend starting earlier if you can. Let's say you're a student with an SAT or PSAT score of 1100 and you want to get to 1550. That type of massive improvement is almost impossible to do in one summer of prep. But in 2 summers, it's quite possible. So let's say you start in the summer between 9th and 10th grade, and you move your 1100 up to, say, 1370. That's great. Then you can take off during the school year and return to prep the next summer between 10th and 11th grade in order to make the final push to 1550. Finally, you take the test in the fall of junior year. So basically, you're doing 2 pushes up in the score in order to achieve a massive improvement. And that's one of the reasons that it's great to start early, is that there isn't a cap on your score. Now, you might say, won't your child just forget everything he or she learned that first summer? We actually find that this is not the case, at least for our students. If you prep in a very fundamental way that focuses on building your math, reading, and writing skills rather than on test-taking tricks, you don't really lose that. This actually segues into another reason that starting prep early is a good idea, which is that it helps with school. If you're better at math, reading, and writing, if you're basically just better at thinking, then obviously you're going to get better at school as well. And this is something that actually a lot of our students have told us, is that school just seems easier once you've done some SAT or ACT prep. The final question is, what's a good score? The short answer is, unfortunately, not helpful. But the long answer should be. What you want to do is look at the 25th and 75th percentile scores for the colleges in which you're interested. The 25th percentile means that 25% of the students who go to that school got that test score or worse. The 75th percentile means that 25% of the students who go there got that score or better. Generally, I tell students that if you're below the 25th percentile, your chances of admission are low. If you're above the 75th percentile, you have a good to great chance. And if you're near the median score, then you have a decent shot. The reason for this is that colleges don't want to hurt their own statistics. Colleges are quite competitive with one another. They look at the US News rankings, and part of that ranking is test scores. If by admitting you, the college drags down its own stats, you need to offer something unique to make them admit you. Here's data on a couple of colleges. Stanford is a top school, and you can see that their 75th percentile is a 1540, or a 35 on the ACT. UC Berkeley is still a top school, but slightly lower ranked than Stanford is, and the scores also reflect that. Their 75th percentile is a 1490 on the SAT and a 34 on the ACT. So basically, what score is good will vary greatly depending on what colleges you're targeting. For top schools, you probably want to be at 1500 plus or 34 plus. For mid-tier schools, 1300 on the SAT or 28 on the ACT might be good. Basically, it depends, so make sure you do your research. That's all for this presentation. If you made it this far, please give us a like, and of course, feel free to ask additional questions in the comments.